is Bess Sadler. I'm here representing, my full-time job is at the University of Virginia, but this particular talk is about the work that I do for an organization called EIFL, Electronic Information for Libraries, and specifically a subgroup of EIFL called EIFL FOSS, so free and open source software. And in your presentation, or I mean in the schedule, it says that a gentleman named Tigran is giving this talk with me. He wasn't able to make it. Tigran is the other co-chair of this group. He's the head of systems for the Armenian National Science Library, and he used his travel budget to go to the Netherlands instead, so don't feel too bad for him. So who is EIFL? We are a library consortium, possibly the largest library consortium in the world, because we represent all the countries you see on that map there. A lot of countries that don't have other representation. So these are not people who would be part of ALA or CLA. And we get a lot of our funding through the Open Society Institute, which is part of the George Soros's Soros Foundation. So I don't need to lecture librarians about the importance of information. If a society does not have access to information, you really can't do a lot of the things that a society needs to do. You can't have education, you can't have medicine, you can't have much of an economy, you're not going to be doing any research. It's going to be hard to train doctors and teachers. And you can't really have democracy. That's especially important to the Soros Foundation, and that's a lot of why he has funded that and why the other funders fund these kinds of projects. There are a lot of barriers to open information, especially in the developing world. There's financial barriers, technological barriers, and legal and political barriers. And EIFL's mission is to lower those barriers in whatever ways that we can. Some of the ways that we do that are through cooperation. One thing we do not do is give out money. When people think about international aid organizations, they think about handing out bags of money, and that simply isn't anywhere in our mission statement. I don't know if anyone in here is involved with serials much. A lot of people have heard about the crisis in North American libraries around the prices of journals, having to purchase database subscriptions. That's probably going to sound familiar to most people. Remember that we're not even paying retail. We're paying significantly reduced prices because we all belong to library consortium who use their group negotiation to lower the prices. Well, one of the things that EIFL has done is they've joined all of these communities in the developing and transition world into large enough consortium that they can now negotiate for lower prices the same way that North American and Western European library consortium has. That's been a tremendous success. I mean, this is the kind of project where for an initial investment of some staff time, some expertise, you generate a self-sustaining program that creates, these people now know how to negotiate their own contracts. EIFL still provides some support, especially to new countries who are trying to join. But for the most part, this is a self-sustaining program now. They also have programs around open access awareness raising and advocacy, so both trying to get open access journals published, trying to advocate within North American and Western European universities to publish via open access, because that tremendously increases the amount of information that's available in EIFL countries. They also represent all the EIFL countries at the WIPO, and they have a very active advocacy arm around intellectual property. And, as you might have guessed, they also have, or they're starting to have, this is a new program, a program around open source software for libraries, free and open source software, and free in all senses of those words. Free for some pretty important reasons. So a Ed Summers, you'll notice he's sporting a very nice Eiffel t-shirt today. Rhino had his Eiffel t-shirt on earlier, and Eric Hatcher was also at this meeting in Italy for the launch of this meeting. One of the other guys at this meeting was a very interesting systems librarian from Zimbabwe named Amos, and he gave me this. I traded it to him for a loonie, because he thought it was pretty cool. You'll notice something, it's 100,000 Zimbabwean dollars, right? Rich. Except it's not actually worth anything because, first of all, their currency is very deflated, which is why he was carrying $100,000 around in his wallet in the first place. And second of all, it expires. You have to spend this money before the 31st of December 2006. Right, no, exactly. I mean, Dan's pulling out his wallet and checking his money. Well, imagine, living in a society where as soon as you get your paycheck, you have to run out and spend it. Because if you hang on to it too long, it's just going to disappear. It's going to be worthless paper. That's a lot of what Eiffel countries are facing. Not only do they have deflated currency and tremendous financial problems at home, but to then put them in a situation where they need to be purchasing software in American dollars. It's not going to happen. I mean, how many American dollars would you trade for 100,000 Zimbabwean dollars? I got this one for a loonie. ILS vendors are not that generous. Another interesting fellow at the conference is this guy named Irakli. He tells a great story about getting his PhD in physics. He's from Georgia. This is Georgian. They have their own character set. I didn't know that before this meeting. He got a PhD in physics just in time in Moscow, and went back to Georgia just in time for Georgia to secede from the Soviet Union. So, as he says, and then there was no more physics. So I thought maybe we should have a national library. So he started one. So what this says is Irakli, and I can't pronounce his last name, president of the Georgia National Library Federation, and this is another example of the kinds of problems that libraries in Eiffel countries face in creating an ILS. There is no ILS that supports the Georgian language. There's one that supports Russian. Georgian librarians are, understandably kind of reluctant to implement software solutions in Russian. And this is only one example. Georgia is actually a fairly large country, and they have quite a bit of money set aside that they want to use to develop an ILS that will work in Georgian. A lot of countries aren't in that situation. They have an even less widely spoken language. So we need an ILS that is fully internationalized, that the barriers are going to be pretty low to developing an interface in a local language. And this is where Library in a Box comes in. So again, another one of the groups that was represented at this Eiffel FOSS kickoff meeting in Italy was a group called the Tactical Technology Collective. They are based out of the Netherlands, though the gentleman who started them, I think, is actually Polish. They have had a tremendously successful product called NGO in a Box. If you want to know more about it, head on over to ngoinabox.org. And what they've done, NGO stands for non-governmental organization. So your typical charity that you might think of is going to be called an NGO. So Amnesty International, Greenpeace, those are some of the very large international ones that a lot of us have heard of. There's also going to be quite a few local ones working for democracy, working for women's rights, working for, to abolish child marriage, stuff like that. Well, these groups need technical support. They're doing great work in the community, but they need to be able to check their email. They need quite a lot of security support. They need to be able to make sure that the government isn't tapping their files, tapping their phones. So what Tactical Technology Collective has done, they've created an excellent product where they take open source software, they vet it, they make it very easy to install, and they package it up in a box. So, you know, in a box that they can then distribute. They distribute in all kinds of languages, and this has been a tremendous success. They also have a support mechanism around this called a source camp. I think I'm going to get to that in a little bit. So our vision that came out of this meeting was, can we apply this model to the ILS? We have a market. We have people who want this. And we have some viable software. There's both Evergreen and Koha right now that I think could, with some investment, with some effort from the community, fit this bill quite nicely. The source camp model is an important part of this because the software is only the tip of the iceberg. I'm reading a really excellent book right now called, I can't think of what it's called right now. It's something like How to Develop Open Source Software. The first thing it says in that book, and I've really tried to take this to heart, is that you need to build the community before you write a line of code. And I think that's especially true for this particular project. I think we can all see it in Code4Lib. I mean, the actual code in Code4Lib, I would argue, is a small part of the importance of the organization. With Library in a Box, with Eiffel, this is doubly important because you're trying to create a sustainable model where people are going to be able to rely on each other for support. Ideally, we would like people to be able to implement an ILS, and then we would just go away. And they would, you know, we don't want to actually go away, but we want to do something like the journal program, where they have the skills that they need, they're running it now. It's not really any of our business. We can go off and do other things. And then the last part of this vision is the leapfrog. If we're going to go to this much trouble, we want to develop something really good. We don't want to develop an ILS from 5 years ago. We don't want to develop an ILS that has all the problems that plagues everyone in this room that runs an ILS. I mean, come on. Why does your OPAC still suck, right? Like, I can't even think of how many times that article was assigned in library school. So we want to build in some kind of faceted browsing with it. That's part of what Eric's been working on with us for Flare. Some kind of data visualization as well. Now, a lot of the benefits for Eiffel libraries are fairly obvious. The licensing fees is the top one. Thank you. We have several libraries who are having to close their doors because they got a grant to automate their library, they purchased a commercial ILS, and now they don't have the money to continue it. So financial concerns are top of the list, no doubt. But there's also a lot of concerns that one might not think of. It doesn't make a lot of sense if what we're trying to build is a global knowledge community to have people in Africa and Asia and Eastern Europe taking all their currency and paying it to American software developers. It makes a lot more sense for them to keep it in country for a lot of reasons. You're creating jobs there, you're creating knowledge there, you're giving the graduates of these universities a job to work at when they graduate. You're building up a whole new sector of the economy that's never really existed before. The local language support, we've already touched on that, and the most important one is that for many libraries, this really is their only option. So what are we doing right now? One thing that Karen mentioned in the keynote was that a concern that a lot of funders have is this thing fully baked? Well, that's a concern that our funders have as well. So one of the first things we're doing is in the next few months, we're doing this study. We're using the Open Business Readiness Rating to examine closely Evergreen, Koha, and a commercial ILS to do a feature-by-feature analysis do some needs analysis with our users, do a gap analysis between where things are right now and where we need them to be before we would be able to deploy. And that paper hasn't been written yet, has already been accepted at IFLA in Senegal next August, and hopefully it'll be published after that. So what we're hoping is that by putting this effort in, we'll not only be helping ourselves, this is information we need, but by giving that back to the community, we can create a body of documentation so that when people in this room go to their funders and say, look, we really should be thinking about an open source ILS. You can go armed with some journal articles to back up, bring the numbers. Like Karen said, I thought that was excellent advice, and I've already been talking to some of the people in this room about the importance of publishing articles about this stuff and getting some evidence that we can muster. Another thing that we're doing is we're recruiting country coordinators, and we're doing that community building that I was talking about. What we want to have is communities in each country that can support each other. We're also applying for funding. We're pursuing strategic partnerships. That's a lot of what I've been doing here. Meeting with people in the Code4Lib community who have the same goals that we do, ultimately, so that we can work together, so that we can all use our limited pots of money, spend them in strategic ways, and ultimately advance everyone's goals further than we'd be able to individually. We're choosing sites for the pilot migration, and hopefully later this year we're going to have some funding and we're going to actually start contracting some software development. So we just named our first advisory board, and these are the people on it. You'll see myself and Tigran at the top, but you also see some names you recognize, Art Rhino and Ed Summers. Rishabh Iyer Ghosh, I was very pleased to see him. He just spearheaded a huge study for UNESCO around the use of open source in Europe and how much that has contributed to the European economy. It's a great organization, and if you would like any more information about it, please feel free to contact me or anyone on this list, and I'll be around the conference for the rest of the trip. Does anyone have any questions?
I really think this is an interesting idea, but I'm a little worried, I think, a little bit about your idea of the leapfrog. When I was at the ACES conference, I was talking to a bunch of people. I did a lot of research in sub-Saharan Africa, and they found that they mostly focused on medical issues. And they found that by going to this next greatest thing stuff, it just really backfired, and that the real simple answers were the ones that actually they were able to implement and the people were able to use. So I was wondering if you really thought about that aspect of it.
I'm really glad you brought that up. That's a good point. One of the things that I try to mention in talks like this, but that I didn't, is that in the countries I'm talking about, we need to be careful about who we're talking about dealing with. So we're not talking about village medical clinics. We're not talking about small public libraries. We're talking about national libraries. We're talking about national universities, which have a surprising amount of infrastructure. I mean, these are people who have systems librarians on staff. In order to be a pilot project, you have to have internet access. You have to have Linux expertise in-house. You have to already be trying to do a migration effort. So I do hear what you're saying, and I'm
So you're not going for that market?
We're not going for that market. That's right.
So you're really okay.
We're going for the large, the libraries that would look surprisingly like your home libraries. Any other questions? Yeah.
Ultimately, do you partner to? I mean, do you plan to say, hey, this works really great for all these countries who don't have a lot of money? How about you guys have a lot of money too? This is really the best product out there. Are you trying to be best, best in class out there?
That would be wonderful, obviously. I mean, everything that we produce is going to be open source and is going to feed back into the community. So it may not be the situation where your library wants to implement library in a box per se, but I do feel like anyone who's interested in open source ILSs is going to ultimately benefit from the work that we do in making the, I mean, already I've been talking to some of the librarians here from French-speaking Canada, who are really interested in seeing some of this internationalization stuff take off. Everyone can benefit from an installer that's easier to use. So whether we ourselves are going to be best of breed, I very much doubt it because that's not our aim. I do think we're going to be contributing to something that eventually is. Anyone else? All right, well, thanks a lot for giving me the opportunity.